To the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang.
Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope everybody's having a great day so far. The transfer talk is heating up, and it has been doing so over the last few days. We're going to talk Mikel Merino on this episode. It's another episode of the Scouting Report here on the Chronicles of a Gooner pod, and we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the Spanish midfielder Arsenal are continuously being linked with. Now, for those of you that have never watched one of these before, I'm just going to quickly break down the sections that we're going to do. I'm going to set the context around what's going on with this particular player, how serious is Arsenal's interest in Mikel Merino as far as we understand it. We're going to reflect on the player's career so far. We're going to go through some of his underlying metrics. Then I'm going to tell you what the eye test told me, having watched Mikel Merino quite a bit in terms of research for this episode, but also having seen him live twice at the European Championships. After we talk about the eye test and what that tells us, we're then going to bring you a conclusion. I'm going to let you guys know whether or not I think Mikel Merino would be a good signing. And if I do, what do I think his role will look like at Arsenal? We'll take comments, we'll take questions along the way. That's the beauty of doing these things live. I'll also let you know about a Patreon episode that is coming your way a little bit later on this week as well. So lots and lots to get into on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Thank you for joining me. Okay, let's begin then with the context around this. Let's bring you some background. Why are we talking about Mikel Merino? Now, of course, fresh off winning the European Championships with Spain, Arsenal are being heavily linked with a move for the Real Sociedad midfielder. Now, according to some journalists, Sam Dean is one of the people that's been reporting that actually this is a long-standing interest. Actually, this is an interest that goes back way before the European Championships and before he came into the kind of more public eye, if you like. He's a player that's very well known in Spain. He's a player that's been very effective for Real Sociedad. And he's a player, from what we understand, that Mikel Arteta has been an admirer of for a while. But people could be forgiven for thinking Mikel Merino sounds all a little bit underwhelming, given that he played for Newcastle in the Premier League previously, and it didn't really go that well. We're hearing reports that £20 million could do this deal, which is a very reasonable amount in today's market, which is certainly not something you come across every day. Normally, when Arsenal go in for someone, normally when the bigger clubs go in for players, the selling clubs will do everything within their power to try and push that fee up as much as they possibly can. But given Mikel Merino's contract situation, and I guess his age, it's not going to be easy for Real Sociedad to do that. They know that if they are going to part ways with Mikel Merino, there is a ceiling with regards to how much they could stand to earn. Now, I'll talk about his age. He's 28 years old, which means he's not in that typical age profile that Arteta and Edu have tended to go for in recent times. Does that put you off? I mean, some people will probably say it does. For me, no, it doesn't really. And we read a piece from James Bench just a few days ago in which he stated that actually there was more likely chance that we were going to see more Trossards and Jorginhos, is how he put it, than, you know, us breaking the bank for a load more sort of 21 to 24-year-olds. Now, sometimes, you know, you need that in a squad. You need that balance. You can't win something with a team full of kids. You need those senior heads around. And Mikel Merino, because he's incredibly experienced and has been around the block for a while, falls into that category. But he's just won a European Championship as well. So when you talk about the need for winners within your group, this guy would certainly tick that box. Now, according to The Athletic, Mikel Arteta has requested personally to the Arsenal board that they go and make this deal happen. This is a player that he personally really, really wants. And we've heard in the past that he's been impressed with Mikel Merino's physicality, which you can assume gives Mikel Arteta confidence he could do it in the Premier League, despite that relatively unsuccessful spell in the past. But also his technical level is incredibly high, and that's something that Mikel Arteta looks for in a midfielder as well. So that's the context around it. That's what we know at the time of recording. This could all change very, very rapidly. But I thought I'd bring you up to speed with what's being said, what's being reported, and why I've got to the point where I felt the need to bring you an episode of the Scouting Report. Next up, we're going to look into Mikel Merino's career so far. Pamplona born, a European champion, a DFB Pokal winner with Borussia Dortmund, a Nations League winner with Spain, and a Copa del Rey winner with Real Sociedad. Now, we talk a lot about the Spanish side that just won the European Championships and the fact that De La Fuente, the coach, had managed them at different levels and had sort of worked his way up the ranks. The style of football in Spain is very, very clear. Now, there may be differences with regards to how some managers do it and when players go away and play for their clubs. Of course, there'll be a variance in, their styles of play. But ultimately, the core principles of Spanish football are well known. They're very, very clear. And someone like Mikel Merino, who, aside from winning what I've just mentioned as a senior player, has also won European Championships with the Spanish national side at under 19 and under 21 level. I think that played a big part in why De La Fuente believed in him and trusted in him. And that's what I keep saying about the difference between Spanish and English football. There's a clear identity when it comes to Spanish football. There's a clear way of playing. There are core principles that you pick up right from the very beginning of your career. And even if you go on to play abroad or for different managers with varying styles, when you're then asked to go back and play for the national team, yeah, you know what, maybe your game's changed a little bit, but you were brought up playing that way. And I think that gives you a cohesion and it makes you look more like a club team than any other international team. And that's ultimately, for me, why Spain came out on top at these European Championships. And he is someone that's been involved with the national team, albeit not always a starter, for quite some time. He started his career at Osasuna in Spain. He joined Borussia Dortmund in 2016 for 3.75 million euros. Only made, though, 9 appearances for the Bundesliga outfit. So it's fair to say his move to Germany didn't really go that well. He then joined Newcastle, initially on loan, before signing officially for Newcastle United in 2018. That was a deal worth around about 7 million euros. Did he pull up any trees here in the Premier League, here in the UK with Newcastle United? Not really. 25 appearances he made in total for the Northeast club, 1 goal and 1 assist. He then left Newcastle and signed for Real Sociedad, where he currently plays his football, back in 2018. That was in a deal believed to be worth 12 million euros. But for them, he's been much more successful. He's been much more of a key part, and he's found a home, you have to say. 242 appearances and counting, assuming that he doesn't join us, over the course of this summer so far. 27 goals and 30 assists. So nearly 60 goal contributions in that period of time. For someone who isn't an attacking midfielder and certainly isn't a forward, that's pretty good going, I would say. Now, I said that he'd been involved in the Spanish setup for a while, and I mentioned the fact that he played under 19s level, under 21s level, but he only made his senior debut for Spain in 2020. So he would have done that at around about the age of 24, 25. So quite late on in his career, when you think about how early players are breaking into national teams now. Look at Lamine Yamal, for example, who turns up at the Euros at just 16 years old. 28 appearances for the national team, 2 goals, including that massive winner against Germany in the quarterfinals of Euro 2024. That was a huge moment, I think, in Spain's European Championship campaign. So when you look at his past, yeah, there are a few trophies on the board. He's played in a few different leagues, started in La Liga with Osasuna, as we mentioned, went over to Germany, didn't really work, went to the Premier League, it didn't really work, has gone back to Spain and it's worked. And so there could be a case made or an argument made that actually this is a guy who, is very much suited to Spanish football. So how does that translate? How will that work when he's tasked with making the move, if this does happen, to the Premier League and fitting in somewhere totally different? That's the big question, I guess. Now we're going to look at some of his underlying metrics, and then we'll be able to give you a better indication of where his strengths and weaknesses lay. Right, let's have a look then at Mikel Merino's underlying metrics, and we've used FB Ref to bring up this data. Now, the way FB Ref does this is that they compare the player to his positional peers in the men's Big Five leagues, UEFA Champions League, UEFA Europa League, over the last 365 days. So that's how this is being worked out. Obviously, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to see the bar graph if you like. If you're listening to us on audio, don't worry, I'm going to explain it as thoroughly as possible. The things that jump out to me: non-penalty goals, 0.2 per 90. So that's basically 1 goal in every 5 games. Now, for a midfield player who isn't labeled as an attacking midfield player, I think that's really positive. I think that's really strong. And it puts him in the 94th percentile up against his peers. So he's better than 94% of his peers that he's being compared to in that particular department. Really, really impressive stuff. His non-penalty XG, so the goals that he's expected to score, excluding penalties, given the positions he gets in, given the chances he has, the number of shots, etc., is 0.16 per 90. So if he's on 0.2 goals per game, but his XG is lower than that, it means he's outperforming his XG, which suggests that he takes chances when they come his way, that he has a good success rate in that particular area of the game, and he's someone that is a goal threat. I do, however, looking at this, I do have some concerns about Mikel Merino, because there are things that I was expecting to look far better than they do when I'm actually diving into the metrics. And that makes me feel a little bit uneasy about certain elements of his games. Passes attempted, pass completion rate, and progressive carries. All of those things are worryingly low. His pass completion rate is 76.5%. Now, when you're a side that does everything in terms of trying to be in control, in terms of trying to dominate, you need a strong pass completion rate. Central midfield is an area that you certainly don't want to be giving the ball away frivolously in. So to have a pass completion rate as a central midfield player of 76.5% is worrying to me. He's in the 18th percentile for that. So he's only better than 18% of his peers in that particular department. Now, if we're talking about a winger, I'm less worried about this. If we're talking about a centre forward, I'm less worried about this, because ultimately they will be in areas of the pitch more often than not where they're trying to make a difference. And that means taking greater risk in terms of the way you distribute the ball, etc., etc. But for a central midfielder to have a pass completion rate of 76.5% and be so low down on this in comparison to his peers concerns me. Then I thought maybe it's because Mikel Merino plays lots and lots of progressive passes. Does he play lots and lots of progressive passes? On average, he plays 6.1 progressive passes per game. That puts him in the 76th percentile. It goes some way in explaining why his pass completion rate isn't as good as it should be, but I expected the progressive passes metric to show more, given that his pass completion rate is so low. That was my kind of explanation and justification for it, at least in my head, before I looked further down this list of statistics. Progressive carries, he's not very strong in that department, 0.93 per game. And that means he's in the 32nd percentile for that. He's very good at taking people on. He's in the 77th percentile to that in terms of touches. Pretty good there. Progressive passes received, he receives on average 3.38 per game, which means he receives the ball quite a bit off of the Real Sociedad backline. And we do need someone in that midfield that is comfortable in doing that and is comfortable picking up the ball from deeper areas. Interceptions, really, really low again. Not really doing the business there. From a defensive point of view, in terms of tackles, things look a little bit better. He's in the 83rd percentile there, averaging 2.66 tackles per game. Pretty strong in aerial duels. He averages just under 6 per game. That's aerial duels 1, by the way. So he's in the 99th percentile. So the aerial aspect of Mikel Merino's game is really, really strong. And I like that. And I think that that feeds into what we are doing as a team. Now, when I look into the FB Ref stat pack and, and look at these metrics individually, what they then do is they use the data and they compare them to players that have similar data so that you can get a feel for the player's style. And the names that came up for this, I have to say, aren't particularly inspiring. Brian Cristante of Roma, Adrian Rabiot of Juventus, and Casemiro are, I guess, the three standout names in terms of comparing Mikel Merino to someone that maybe we know a little bit better. When I began this research, I was expecting to be far more impressed with these results than I actually was. And so how does that impact my overall feeling on Mikel Merino and whether or not he would be the right signing for Arsenal in that midfield this summer? Let's do that conclusion part. Actually, no, wait, we're going to do the eye test bit first. How can I jump straight to the conclusion? Shocking of me. Eye test coming up next. Okay, so what does the eye test tell me? Physically, he's a very, very imposing player, at least by La Liga standards. Now, you might say, what do you mean by La Liga standards? What I mean is that he's playing in a league that is less physically demanding than the league that we're potentially talking about him coming to. And so I say this a lot about Serie A players as well. If you stand out physically in La Liga or in Serie A, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stand out physically when you come to the Premier League. I take confidence in the fact that he's top of the class, if you like, in that sort of aspect of things in his league. And so that makes the transition easier, probably. But is he someone that's going to be able to physically impose himself in the same way on these shores? I don't know about that. He clearly enjoys making advanced runs into the penalty area. This is based on clips and footage that I've been watching. Seems to be a decent finisher, and the statistics, the underlying metrics back that up. Very, very left-footed player. 6'2" so he's handy in the air. And again, you look at the number of aerial duels that he wins, and that backs that up. And it plays into our set piece threat that we seem to have developed as well over the past couple of seasons. Looks quite comfortable going and pressing high up the pitch, which I was positively surprised by when I looked at the footage. He gives me, based on the eye test, Granit Xhaka vibes, because he seems to look quite similar physically in terms of he's a tall, imposing midfield player, but, is definitely more comfortable on the ball rather than sitting at the base of a midfield and trying to be that destroyer. The way he shapes his body when he receives the ball, when he puts his foot on it, when he's looking to pick out a pass, is very Granit Xhaka-esque. So at least aesthetically, there are some real similarities between the two. And I think looking at all of this, his best position is probably as a left 8. Seems to be quite an intelligent footballer as well. The way he sort of makes late runs into the penalty area is something that I really like. The way that he seems to find the right spaces to be able to receive the ball off of the back line comfortably, uses his frame really well. So he looks like an intelligent footballer. But the eye test, I think, is more complimentary based on the clips I've watched. And I'm always wary of the fact that when you go looking for clips, you're probably going to get the positives and you're very unlikely to get the negatives. Who puts a compilation together of how bad someone is or how badly they do one particular thing? It does happen on social media, but I'm always wary that clips and compilations do tend to show the positive side of a player more than the negative side. So in conclusion, then, I think it's important that we do this. I think the eye test shows me more positives than the underlying metrics. And then I guess the question is, how much value do I put in the eye test, and do I put that above what I'm seeing in the underlying metrics? Do I think that some of those underlying metrics could look a lot healthier in a better team, which we are? How much do I believe that? I don't know. My conclusion is that he'd be a good addition to this squad. I don't see him as somebody who's at the level to walk straight into the first 11. Now, he might come, impress, and over time earn himself a place in Arsenal's best 11. But today, based on the eye test and based on the underlying metrics and all the research that I've done over the past 24 hours, as well as the fact that I've watched him a couple of times at the Euros live over the last 2 weeks, that's where I see him. I see him as a squad player. I see him as someone that would come in and be a good addition. And I guess if you're talking about £20 million, then that kind of makes sense. If you've raised the bar and raised the level of this Arsenal team, then you have to accept that to then improve on that, you're going to have to go bigger and bigger and bigger in order to keep moving that needle and in order to keep taking the team forward. If you looked at that midfield and you found a player for £20 million that you thought instantly improved it, unless you found the bargain of the century, that would ring alarm bells, wouldn't it? I don't think this is a transfer that is dependent on us selling, which you can't say is the case for some of the other players that we've been linked with. We heard that Nico Williams is someone that we quite like, but that is based on Arsenal potentially selling someone to be able to do that or clearing space, as it was put. £20 million isn't a lot of money nowadays. I'd be a little bit reluctant based on what I've said to go too much higher than that. Because of my concerns over whether he's good enough to start week in, week out, and because of the fact that he's 28 years old, which isn't the normal profile that we go for. But if you think about it in context, if you're sitting there thinking 20 million is a lot of money, what are you talking about, Harry? That could be spent in a much wiser way. Nuno Tavares is moved to Lazio, although we're going to get the money a year down the line, pays for half of it. So that puts into context how little this money is. Nuno Tavares has had some really poor seasons out on loan after a poor season at Arsenal, and he still managed to maintain that value. So if Mikel Merino is going for 20, then I think that's a worthwhile investment. But as I keep saying, this is for me very, very much a squad signing. Will he start some games? Yes, because we've got a lot of games to come next season. Will he be one of those players that comes on most of the time that he's on the bench? Probably, because I think he'll be trusted to come on and play an important role. But is he so good that I would displace at the moment, because they're all still at the club, Partey, Rice or Odegaard? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be so sure that he would raise the bar. I think he would complement them. I think he would back them up if he was to arrive, and allow us to be able to tinker with that a little bit, give people the kind of rest time that they haven't really had in the last couple of seasons. And you could argue that not last season, but the season before that caught up with us and took its toll. But he is, for me, if we do get him, very much a squad signing. And I think people have to have that level of expectation if this deal does get over the line. Don't think that he's going to come in and completely change the dynamic of our midfield. He's a good addition to it. But he'd be complementing your Parteys, your Rices, your Jorginhos, your Odegaards. Mikel Arteta will still see Kai Havertz as a left 8 option as well in certain game states, etc., etc. But my overriding feeling, having done this exercise, is, and I don't want to put a dampener on it, I don't want to put a negative on it, because that's not what I'm trying to do at all. But my overriding feeling is I'm a lot more disappointed with those metrics in some of those key areas than I thought I was going to be, having done the eye test piece first. So I'm a bit conflicted. I don't know if the metrics aren't telling the full story. I always say that you shouldn't base everything on stats and that you should take into account the eye test, but it depends how much weight you want to put on each one of those things. Is it 70% eye test, 30% stats? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Which way round is it? I always say that I like to do the eye test first, which is what I've done here, because the eye test allows me to take note of what I think I've seen, and then the metrics part will either back up or contradict what I think I've seen. And in this instance, I think that to a point, the metrics do contradict what I've seen. But I don't know if in a better environment, if in a better team, those things are less of a problem. And actually, we can improve on those metrics quite quickly. Now, if he was a 21-year-old, then I'd look at this completely differently. If he was 21, 22, I'd look at it and I'd go, well, there could be improvement in X area, Y area, and Z area, but we've got time to do that. We've got time to make that happen. At 28 years old, it would be a here and now signing. That's what it would be. It would be an addition to the squad that could help us in the here and now, first and foremost. And so when I look at those metrics, I am a little bit concerned. I say that he reminds me of Granit Xhaka. I think at least aesthetically he does. A lot of people thought that Granit Xhaka was a player that we could upgrade on. We let him go. For a while, it took us time to figure out how we were going to replace him with the players that we had. A lot of people disagreed with the idea of Kai Havertz being the solution, being the one that took on that role. And over time, I think Mikel Arteta realized himself that that wasn't the way to go. Mikel Merino is a good player and he'd be a good addition to the squad, but is he an automatic starter at Arsenal? Based on this, for me, no. Still doesn't mean that we shouldn't sign him, though. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't go and get him. I think if the price is right and you think it brings value to the squad, then go and do it. But if you're expecting him to come in and transform our midfield or take it to a whole new level, I think you're getting a little bit carried away with yourself. Okay, just a couple of quick bits before we go. Patreon episode coming out later this week. The first one on Patreon. And if you're a free member, you'll have access to this one as well. The link to sign up for free over the course of the summer is in the description below. If you prefer to go one further and support me to bring you more content, then you can do so as well. But it's not compulsory. If you do support, however, I'm really, really appreciative of that. If I could ask you before I go, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand spanking new as well. All of that stuff really, really does help more than you'll know. And if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. I'll be back tomorrow to take some of your questions because I've got a dash. Back on your radios today, back on TalkSport 2 between 3 and 5 p.m. With the brilliant Sam Ellard. Come and join us for that. Or you can catch up with it if you miss it on the TalkSport app. TalkSport 2, that is from 3 to 5 p.m. The social with me and Sam Ellard. Yeah, looking forward to getting your thoughts in the comments down below on Mikel Merino. What do you make of my assessment of the 28-year-old? Will he be a good signing for Arsenal in your opinion? What will his role look like in your opinion? Let me know your thoughts down below and I'll pick up some of those on the next one. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and have a great Wednesday up the Arsenal.